On the red dirt road of the southern states, Daniel Reeves drove an old pickup to a $100 house, thinking he was only buying silence. The door creaked, the bowl of porridge dry, a thin wisp of smoke, then, in the shadow of the porch, a voice whispered, "Dad." From that moment, he laid down his armor, picked up a hammer, and relearned how to be at home. If you've ever been lost within your own heart, follow this road all the way through. Late afternoon. The red dirt road stretched ahead like an old scar across the southern land. The wind swept through the rows of leafless trees, lifting fine dust into a hazy trail behind the wheels. The old pickup, rust-spotted and battered, moved slowly, groaning under the weight of miles it had carried. Overhead, the sky was heavy, clouds thick as gray wool blankets suffocating the last light of day, leaving only a muted ash color descending. Inside the cabin, Daniel Reeves gripped the steering wheel tightly. His hands were rough, veins standing out, yet they trembled subtly, a reflex beyond his control. Each time a tire dropped into a pothole, his shoulder jerked, and his eyes flicked swiftly to the roadside, a habit of a special forces soldier not yet shed. The trees beside the road, shadows lengthening, each rustling leaf, triggered a tension in him, like stepping into a combat zone. He knew no one lurked behind the old oaks. No bullets, no hidden mines beneath the soil. Yet his body ignored reason. His heart pounded, blood rushed to his temples. The faint smell of gunpowder seemed to linger somewhere in the cold air, mixing with the scent of damp earth. He clenched his teeth, silently enduring the wave of returning memories. The worn backpack on the passenger seat was heavy, its freight straps recalling years past, sleepless nights, helicopters hovering, comrades falling beside him. In his mind, these images flashed sharply, fragmented but piercing, making his grip tighten on the wheel to suppress the tremor. He had left the battlefield, left the screens behind. Yet the war lingered inside, like a shadow unwilling to release him. It was a quiet fear, that he might never escape it, that even this ordinary dirt road could become a march into death. The road seemed endless. The truck crawled slowly, headlights casting a weak yellow glow into the evening haze. Daniel tilted his head, eyes fixed forward. In that gaze were alertness, confusion, and a fragile hope that at the end of this road, there would be a place free from the echoes of the past. He remembered the moment he signed the papers to buy this farm, $100, a laughably small sum, yet for him, it was a ticket to another world, a world without orders, without alarms. An abandoned house in the countryside, ignored by all, yet it became his only hope to begin again. But as the truck crept over a small rise, the house appeared in the distance, a chill running down his spine. The roof sagged, the porch caved in, windows dusted over. Everything stood frozen, as if dead for years. It reminded him of derelict buildings at former encampments, places he entered only to find the fallen and abandoned belongings. He gripped the wheel tighter. In that moment, fear surged, as tangible as an old enemy unexpectedly returning. Fear of not having the strength to escape memory. Fear that this house would be another trap where the ghosts of war could find a way back to him. Daniel cut the engine, silence prevailing. Only the wind whistled through the trees, metal creaking slowly. He sat for a long time, inhaling and exhaling, each breath heavy. His body seemed to wrestle with itself. He thought of the past, not erasable, not deniable. Yet perhaps it was time to stop running. The soldier inside whispered that strength lay not in avoidance, but in standing upright before fear, letting it surface, letting it hurt, and then moving forward. The truck door opened. His heavy boots hit the soft, muddy ground. The sound was dry, sharp, a confirmation he had truly arrived. He stood, stretching slightly, eyes scanning the dilapidated house. No hiding, no past chasing from behind, only him and the $100 house, a new beginning. The fear remained, threading through every heartbeat, but beneath it, another feeling arose, quiet resilience. Not a glamorous courage, but the silent kind, like standing guard at night, gripping a weapon, knowing you will survive until dawn. Daniel approached the rusty gate, hand brushing the cold metal. He felt his heart race, but this time he did not step back. He knew there was no choice but to face it. The past had followed him here, but it was here that he would begin learning to let it go. The house became clearer as Daniel drew closer, each step heavy in the softened ground still damp from earlier rain. It resembled not a home, but an aged body rotting, struggling to stand upright against the wind. The sagging porch, mottled rotting wood, patches of rusted tin rattling in the gusts. The front iron gate leaned to one side, hinges loose as if a strong wind could topple it completely. Daniel paused at the gate, calloused hands resting on the icy metal. The chill seeped into his skin, a sensation recalling cement walls of barracks, where he had once leaned for hours, waiting for gunfire to cease. He closed his eyes briefly, letting his breath merge with the rhythm of the wind. Before him lay no battlefield, only an old house. Yet in his chest, the tension of a man who had lived on the edge of life and death persisted. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the damp, cold countryside air. No one awaited him inside. No light spilled from windows, no voice called his name. The silence was so dense he could almost touch it. And within that silence, he realized he resembled the house, abandoned by time, standing still, carrying no traces of warmth. The wind rustled through the trees. Dry leaves spun and fell around his feet. The sound seemed like whispers of the earth, of seasons past, calling him back to the present. Daniel opened his eyes, staring at the faded wooden door. The crack along its grain resembled the wrinkles of an old face, holding countless untold stories. He stepped slowly toward the porch, each footfall weighted by the unfamiliarity pressing down. His worn boots sank slightly into overgrown grass. He heard the dry crackle of broken twigs beneath him, a faint sound but clear in the stillness. The porch leaned sharply to one side, nails rusted and exposed, like the missing teeth of a frail old man. His hand rested on the door latch. The cold pierced through to his bones, making him shiver. Memories surfaced. Steel doors he had kicked open in seized houses, gun tight on his shoulder, eyes straining for threats. Now, his hand only touched aged wood, no force, no orders. Yet the old memories made his heart pound. He stood still, hand on the latch, hearing each leaf drop, each gust of wind whistle through the cracks. Part of him wanted to let go, turn around, climb back into the truck, and leave. But the stronger part kept him there. He knew this was where he would confront himself, his loneliness, the clinging past. Daniel looked up at the dust-covered window. Inside, dark as pitch, he felt the sense of eyes once watching, waiting for someone to return. The emptiness made his chest ache. A sudden gust toppled loose boards. The sound resembled a hoarse lament echoing across the yard. He drew a deep, slow breath. Each inhale filled his chest, each exhale released it heavily. These were breaths once only drawn in the cover of trenches, waiting for a command. Now, they steadied him, signaling he had escaped that world, standing before a different beginning. No one is waiting. The thought resonated, a truth long known, yet standing here, it was clearer than ever. He had returned, yet no arms opened. No voices called. Only the old house and himself, both left behind, both awaiting a reason to exist. He released his hand from the latch, but did not withdraw it. He traced his fingers along the grain, feeling every crack and rough patch. Each mark on the door reminded him that which survives long enough carries the traces of time. So does he. He inhaled again, steadier now. Placing his full palm against the door, he felt the cold seep into his bones. A feeling simultaneously painful and comforting. He knew it would not be easy, the past might return many times, yet he had chosen to step forward, to open the door. The wind whipped fiercely through the trees, tossing dry branches as if nature beat a drum urging him onward. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, brighter now. He exhaled slowly. Quiet resilience rose within, not loud, not flashy, simply acceptance. The past remained behind him, heavy but unchangeable. The old wooden door groaned, letting out a long, mournful creak that echoed into the darkness inside. Daniel pushed gently, the grain of the wood rasped, a dry, brittle sound like old bones rubbing together. He stood at the threshold, inhaling deeply. The musty air hit his throat, thick and heavy, as if he were breathing the cold earth of an abandoned bunker. Yet, oddly, there was another scent mixed in, a faint, fleeting odor, like something that had been cooked and abandoned midway. Inside, the darkness was dense, pierced only by a few pale streaks of light filtering through dust-covered curtains. Daniel moved slowly, his shoes squeaking across the cracked wooden floor. Each step reverberated, turning the house into a hollow box that cried out with every echo. He had expected nothing but cobwebs, broken chairs, lifeless objects rotted by years. But there was more. Amid the thick layer of dust, there were patches where the dirt had been disturbed. The wood beneath was lighter, as though someone had sat here, touched the surface, just yesterday. The first thing that struck him was the old table, scarred with knife marks. On its surface sat a pale blue ceramic bowl, remnants of dried porridge clinging stubbornly inside. A wooden spoon lay at an angle, spotted with brown stains. The scene was too vivid, too immediate to belong to a house abandoned for years. His heart raced, drumming like warning signals. He turned his head, scanning the room. No sound besides the wind whistling through broken cracks. But his soldier's eyes missed nothing. In the corner, pressed against the faded wooden wall, he noticed a clothesline strung haphazardly between two nails. Hanging from it were tiny, faded children's garments, shoulders frayed and yellowed, but freshly washed, free of dust, free of mildew. Beneath the line, a broken chair carried the leftover evidence of several small wooden clothespins. Daniel froze. Air seemed to be sucked from his lungs. The emptiness of the house was only a veneer. Someone had been here, or had lived here very recently. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, as if invisible eyes were following his every movement. He moved toward the kitchen, each step heavy. The kitchen lay deep in the corner, the old tiles stacked unevenly, discolored by age, yet atop it sat a small blackened steel pot, polished smooth by constant use. From its lid, a thin wisp of smoke curled through a crack, drifting lazily before dissolving into the air. Daniel froze. He hadn't imagined it. It was real warm smoke, still fresh. He reached out, his palm met a faint but undeniable heat. Someone had lit a fire recently. His fists clenched. Every muscle coiled, old battlefield reflexes flaring. Blood thumped in his temples, eyes darting in every direction. Memories of houses in the Middle East flooded him, meals left mid-bite, soldiers fleeing, chaos erupting without warning. Yet here, everything was calm, orderly, devoid of panic. He crouched by the table, fingers brushing the rough rim of the ceramic bowl. The texture of the hardened porridge felt unnervingly alive, not relics, but signs of life continuing. A flicker of fear surged. He didn't know whose space he had intruded upon, or who shared it with him, unseen. Daniel lifted his gaze to the kitchen window. The glass was dusty, yet in one corner a semicircular streak had been wiped clean. Someone had stood here, peering outside, brushing away the grime to observe. In that instant, he felt he was intruding upon a stranger's life, each detail exposing their presence. A shiver ran through him. The house, which should have been a sanctuary, now felt like a minefield. Every object, the clothes, the bowl, the smoke, was a signal, a cryptic code. Someone was here, and he had stepped into their world uninvited. The wind hissed through the cracks, stirring the tattered curtain. Pale light flickered across the kitchen, setting the objects into ghostly motion. Daniel stepped back, frozen. His heart raced, then he realized his hand was clutching the folding knife he had drawn from his pocket without remembering when. He released it, letting it slip back in. This was no battlefield, just a kitchen. Yet the tension lingered. He had come seeking peace, only to encounter a ghostly presence. That presence awakened an old fear, that the shadows of war might never leave him. He inhaled slowly, longer this time, trying to quell the rising unease. His eyes rested on the tiny children's clothes hanging silently. They were so small, faded, yet neatly arranged, as if a gentle hand had washed and hung them. In that instant, the tension softened, replaced by curiosity tinged with sorrow. Fragile life had existed here, in a place he thought long dead. He stood for a long while, amidst dust and faint smoke, letting the house speak to him through its silent traces. And in that silence, Daniel began to understand, some truths cannot be avoided. Just as war had left its mark on him, this house imprinted a new reality, that something remained untold, waiting for him to face it. Daniel slowly approached the old wooden table. The surface was mottled with water stains accumulated over years, the wood cracked into tiny furrows. In the center of the table sat a chipped grayish-blue ceramic bowl, unmoving, with remnants of thin porridge dried into coarse patches. A faint scent lingered in the air, a smell that instantly reminded him of field mess halls, where meals were always bland, barely enough to fill the stomach, lacking any true flavor. He lingered there. His hand reached out, gently touching the edge of the bowl, fingertips gliding over the worn glaze. The wooden spoon lay tilted beside it, warped from repeated use, its handle darkened from someone's sweat. As his fingers lightly grazed it, a sudden wave of unease washed over him, almost as if someone had just sat there a few minutes ago, head bowed in silence, then left in a hurry, leaving traces undeniable. Daniel lowered himself onto the chair opposite. It creaked under his weight, producing a subtle sound, enough to break the heavy silence. He placed both hands on the tabletop, rough palms scarred, small scars etched under the weak light filtering through the window. Sitting there, he felt like an intruder in someone else's time, occupying a space belonging to someone absent. He bowed his head, listening to his own breathing, trying to focus, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was far from lifeless. Every tiny detail seemed to breathe alongside him, each crack, each old object whispered the same truth: someone had lived here, someone still lingered. Next to the table, a dust mark faded into a small circle, as if someone had once set down a cup there. On the floor, faint child's footprints, uneven, speckled with dirt. Daniel knelt, fingertips brushing the blurred prints, chest tightening. The small feet were far too tiny for an adult. Memories surged, war-torn children, faces streaked with grime, huddled in a ruined home, staring at him with wide, bewildered eyes. A knot of grief and worry rose inside him. He glanced back at the bowl. The bland porridge now symbolized more than scarcity. It was evidence of a fragile life clinging to existence here. A family? Someone left behind? Or merely a shadow lurking in the corners? The question pierced him, turning the quiet house into a mystery he could not look away from. Daniel picked up the wooden spoon. It was light enough to snap with one motion, yet he did not. Instead, he rolled it between his fingers, listening to the creak of wood against skin. In that instant, a vivid image appeared, a tiny hand once holding this spoon, clumsy fingers bringing it to a mouth, dribbling each drop of porridge. He could almost hear the faint clatter as it touched the bowl, the soft puffing breath of a child learning to eat. The imagined moment made him hesitate. A veteran's heart, used to cold steel and gun smoke, now raced over a tiny wooden spoon. He set it down gently, fingers trembling. The feelings of fear and compassion intertwined, heavy in his chest. A sudden breeze swept through the door crack, stirring the dusty curtain and scattering minuscule specks over the table. In the dim light, they sparkled like tiny embers above the old porridge. Daniel lifted his gaze, watching them, sensing each fragment of memory resurrected, each moment someone had left behind. The house was no longer merely the cheap, abandoned property he had bought. It had become a veil, revealing untold stories. Each tiny detail a puzzle piece, waiting for someone to connect. Daniel realized he had stepped into a narrative that was not solely his own, yet somehow it was drawing him in, demanding that he listen. He sat silently for a long time, hands still pressed against the rough wood, feeling every bump and groove. Part of him wanted to rise, to leave the uncertainty behind. But a deeper, more resolute part kept him seated. War had taught him that sometimes the smallest secrets decide survival. He could not turn away from such clear signs. The bowl, the spoon, the porridge, the clothesline all posed a silent question. And Daniel knew, to answer it, he had to stay. He had to face it. He leaned back, the chair groaned under him, a long creak resonating through the room, then fading into silence, like a sigh. Daniel nodded slightly, as if accepting that the house was no longer a place to flee from, but a mystery he must unravel. Daniel stepped into the backyard, his heavy boots sinking into the mossy, overgrown soil. The sky had darkened further, thick clouds pressing close to the roof, blotting out all light, leaving only faint silver trickles from the gaps above. The wind whistled through the rotting planks, threading into the walls of the old house, producing a haunting sound like the sigh of someone long gone. He had expected only darkness and weeds, but then, another feeling crept in, as if someone unseen were watching him. And then he saw them. From the back porch, where a collapsed roof cast a shadowed corner, 3 small eyes gleamed like tiny coals. They were round, bright, reflecting the fading light of evening. 3 children huddled together, wearing threadbare clothing, so thin that even the wind made the fabric quiver. They hugged their knees, breaths trembling, half hidden in the shadows, half exposed, their gazes wary. Daniel froze. Legs accustomed to battlefield streets and gunfire alleys stiffened, rooted to the ground. His heart pounded, not from fear for himself, but from shock at the fragility before him. He was used to danger, guns, enemies. But no training had prepared him for this, three tiny beings shivering on a dilapidated porch, staring at him with eyes both terrified and hopeful. The space around seemed to solidify. Wind blew, the broken roof creaked, yet all Daniel could hear was his own heartbeat. Every soldier instinct in him activated, noting their posture, how they clung to one another for warmth, the tremor of their thin shoulders, the dirty little feet. Not a sound emerged from them, just a heavy, dense silence. He drew a deep breath, careful not to approach too quickly. Experience told him that haste might frighten them, even three children, but they had nowhere to flee. Daniel set down his backpack near his feet, hands slightly open in a gesture of non-threat. Yet in his mind, questions swirled: why were they here? Who left them? How had they survived in this decaying house? The three children remained silent, eyes fixed on him. The one in the middle, seemingly the eldest, shifted slightly but stayed seated. The left child appeared more alert, lips pressed together. The smallest on the right trembled the most, eyes wide as if on the verge of tears, struggling to hold back. Daniel instinctively placed a hand on his chest. A lump rose in his throat, memories of war, of loss, converging in this moment. Not bullets, not enemies, but these three children shivering from cold and fear made him feel utterly unprepared. He had thought this $100 house would only bring him solitude. But now it revealed another truth, that quiet was filled with the fragile breathing of three little lives. And their presence transformed his silence into a mystery he could not ignore. A gust of wind stirred, scattering dry straw into the children's hair and clothes. The smallest shivered, pressing closer to the other two. This simple, instinctive act of survival tightened Daniel's chest. Memories of young comrades, hasty embraces in bomb shelters, eyes that understood no tomorrow, all resurfaced. Yet here, on this porch, life clung fiercely. The children held each other to stay warm, to resist the wind, to resist abandonment. And Daniel, a man seasoned by loss, suddenly realized he faced a new battle, one for which he had no preparation, yet he had no choice but to confront. He spoke no word. Not a call, not a question. He only stood, breathing evenly, making his presence non-threatening. A voice from the past whispered, maybe he wasn't kind or warm enough to help them. That his own scars, nightmares, could prevent him from being their anchor. But as he looked into their eyes, felt their shivering breaths, Daniel understood, fear didn't matter now. What mattered was simply being present. And that alone was a beginning. He inhaled deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, then exhaled slowly. Behind him, the house; ahead, darkness; before him, three shining pairs of eyes in the dim porch light, all locked him in an irreversible moment. Daniel knew life as a soldier had taken him down many unforeseen paths, but none like this one. The wind gusted stronger through the back porch, carrying the damp smell of rotting wood and cold earth. The three children sat huddled together, their eyes never leaving Daniel. Time seemed held in place for a few suffocatingly long seconds, until a sound slipped out, fragile, trembling, as small as a thread swept away by the wind. Dad. Just one word, short, yet the weight of it pressed down on the entire porch, heavy against Daniel's chest. He froze, as if both feet had been nailed to the damp ground. His heart skipped a beat. His whole body went still, not from threat, but from utter surprise. He had no family. No children. The long years of his life had been woven with the smell of smoke, the blast of gunfire, missions with no guaranteed return. As his comrades married and had children, he was left with a backpack in the barracks. In the letters he sent home, sometimes to his aging mother, sometimes to an old friend, he never imagined a child calling him dad. Yet here, in this house officially recorded as long abandoned, three children spoke the word to him. That word pierced through, like a needle tearing the armor he had worn for decades. He didn't respond immediately. His breath lodged in his throat, heavy as stone. His ears rang, like the artillery barrages of years gone by. He wanted to believe he'd misheard. But no. The child in the middle, shivering, eyes glistening yet still fixed on him, had uttered it. And even as the word Dad hadn't yet faded in the wind, the child's eyes glimmered, half fearful, half expectant, clinging to a fragile hope. Daniel felt his chest tighten. There had been an emptiness inside him for so long, the void of a home, of laughter, of human closeness. He had buried it with discipline, with long deployments. Yet a single short word stirred it all, unearthing every wound, every memory he had tried to hide. He saw the face of his own father, a thin farmer, calling him with brief words at the dinner table. He remembered the faces of the stranger children he had met on the battlefield, calling any American soldier daddy just for a scrap of bread or a cup of water. But this time, it was different. This call was not a plea. It was a belief, a declaration that he was the one they were waiting for. The sky above hung heavy, gray like an old wool blanket draped over the land. In that instant, Daniel felt crushed between two weights, the weight of the past and the weight of a single word. He took half a step back, placing his hand on the back door latch, as if needing a grip to keep from falling. His heart pounded, not with the rhythm of a soldier preparing to fire, but with that of a man awakened to something he had never dared to imagine. The three children remained still, not moving. But their eyes were fixed on him. One nod, one stretch of a hand, and they would rush forward. But Daniel could not. Fear rose, not of an enemy, but of himself. Fear that he wasn't good enough, that the past he carried would ruin everything. He looked at the child who had spoken. Its lips trembled, yet its gaze was steadfast. It did not repeat the word. Once was enough. As if it knew the power of that word, now only waiting to see how the man before them would respond. Daniel bent slightly, bringing his gaze closer. No words emerged from his mouth. He had given orders to soldiers with decisive tone, negotiated with enemies with cold precision. But now, he was utterly silent. A dry leaf fell from the porch roof, brushing lightly against the smallest child's shoulder. It flinched, then pressed closer to the middle child, arms wrapped tightly around each other. In that moment, Daniel saw clearly, despite fear, despite isolation, these three children only had each other. And now, through a trembling word, they had opened the door for him to enter their circle. Within his chest, a small flame sparked, the flame of responsibility, the flame of unexpected attachment. Daniel did not yet know what he would do next, but he understood clearly, he could not turn away. The word had anchored itself in his heart. He stood there, silent for a long while, as if to show the children he would not leave. That he had heard. And that very silence, in the whistling wind, under the decaying porch, became his answer. Daniel Reeves, a soldier who had walked through countless battlefields, a man who had lived amidst explosions and blood, stood speechless before a fragile call. A call that both terrified him to the core and awakened a strength he had never known. Daniel stepped into the small room at the end of the hallway. The wooden door was ajar, and a gentle push made it creak a long, drawn-out groan, like the sigh of something exhausted from waiting too long. Inside, dim light filtered through the single window, dust particles floating in the rays, giving the room the feeling of being swallowed by a fog. In the corner, a low wooden chest sat, so old that its hinges were rusted, the wood mottled with stains from long-forgotten spills. Daniel knelt, placing his calloused hand on the lid. It was cold, rough to the touch, like a small portal to a life he had never known. He hesitated for a brief moment, then pushed gently. The hinges groaned and the lid lifted, sighing a puff of dust into the air. Inside, there was no gold, no treasures. Only a smaller wooden box, neatly tucked into a corner. Daniel lifted it out. The box was light, but as he held it, it felt unbearably heavy, as if it carried the weight of an entire lost memory. He opened the lid carefully, and immediately his eyes fell on an old photograph, faded with age. In the picture, a young woman sat on a wooden chair, her gentle arms cradling three newborns wrapped in white cloth. Her chestnut hair fell softly, her smile warm and serene, eyes sparkling with quiet tenderness. Daniel froze. His heart skipped a beat. He recognized her instantly. Laura. The name didn't escape his lips, but it rang inside his head like a church bell. Laura, the girl he had loved before leaving this small town in a military uniform. The girl who had once stood by the white picket fence, waving him off as he boarded the bus. Her smile had been bright as summer that day, yet her eyes had held a trace of worry. He had promised to return, promised to write, and then the life of a soldier swept him away, leaving a void that nothing could fill. Now, that face appeared in this old photograph, but no longer alone. Laura cradled 3 tiny lives, her eyes in the photo full of a gentleness Daniel had never witnessed. He reached out, fingertips trembling as they brushed the edge of the picture. The air in the room thickened. He sank to the wooden floor, the photograph warming his skin as if it carried heat from another time. Memories flooded back in disjointed fragments. Laura's smile during the church dance. Her voice promising she would wait for him. The first letters he sent, her replies growing shorter, then disappearing altogether. And now this photograph, a late answer, yet clearer than any words. Daniel looked up, the dim room seemingly shrinking around him. Inside the wooden box were a few folded papers, some small objects. A frayed string bracelet, perhaps something Laura had worn. A yellowed envelope, the ink faded, only faintly showing the words, "Return if the recipient cannot be found." He did not open it. His heart was not strong enough to face it just yet. He only looked at the photo once more. 3 newborns in Laura's arms. Their tiny faces bore a striking resemblance to what he had glimpsed on the porch, 3 children sitting together in the shadows, their wide eyes staring back. A fragile, undeniable thread connected the photograph to the present moment. A fear rose within Daniel, not the fear of death or of weapons, but the fear of a man who had missed too much. He trembled realizing he might have let a family slip away, leaving Laura to raise these children alone. And now, with her gone, these 3 children on the porch could very well be his own flesh and blood. He folded the photograph, holding it gently in his hand, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Memory and reality layered upon one another, making his breath heavy as lead. He remembered nights in the barracks, knees hugged tight, staring at the ceiling, questioning the purpose of his life. Now, a piece of that answer lay within this wooden box, within the gaze of the woman he had once loved. Daniel opened his eyes and surveyed the room. Cracked walls, sagging wooden ceiling, floors littered with dust. Yet here, he had found a fragment of his past. A part he had thought the war had permanently erased. He closed the wooden box, holding it close to his chest. A small gesture, yet it carried both trembling and resolve. He knew from this moment forward, every step he took would no longer be solely for his own refuge. The 3 children outside, and the woman in the photograph, had tied him to a different path, a path he had not prepared for, yet could not refuse. Outside on the porch, the wind pressed against the wooden door, making it creak. Daniel remained seated, clutching the box, eyes staring into the distance. Memories had receded, but they had not vanished. They only waited for a day to return, through a faded photograph, through 3 innocent eyes. And now, that past stood right before him, demanding to be faced. Daniel sat back in the damp kitchen. The fire in the old stove had dwindled to embers, flickering light reflecting off ceramic bowls and the cracks in the wooden walls. The 3 children huddled close together, a thin blanket draped over their shoulders, faces smudged with dirt yet their eyes wide open, as if they were afraid to miss a single detail. They did not cry, did not call out for help, they whispered in small, broken sentences, like the wind slipping through the cracks in the boards. "Mom is gone." The middle child's voice trembled, so soft that Daniel had to lean in, listening to every shallow breath just to catch it. The word "gone" fell onto the wooden floor lightly but coldly, like a stone dropped into deep water. The eldest, slightly more composed, perhaps the cleverest, added, eyes fixed on the floor, she said, "If Dad comes back, we must trust him." Daniel remained still, letting those fragmented words find their way. Outside, the wind whispered across the porch, branches tapping lightly against the rusted tin roof, like a subtle rhythm accompanying the small secrets unfolding inside. He had been trained to filter signals from chaos in a headset, amidst gunfire, amidst static waves. Now, he listened in the same way, but this time it touched him directly, bypassing any device. The 3 children held out their wrists instinctively, unplanned. On the tender skin of each, a pale red oval birthmark stood out. Small, painless, but unmistakable in the firelight. Daniel's body went cold. On his own left wrist, he had the same mark. A mark no one else in the family had. For years he had considered it a coincidence. But now, seeing it mirrored on all three children, it was like a mirror reflecting a truth he had not dared voice. He lifted his sleeve slightly, letting the firelight fall on his mark. All three pairs of eyes followed him. No one spoke, yet the silence alone made Daniel feel the invisible bond tightening around him. A storm rose in his chest. He remembered Laura, her bright eyes, her smile the day she had seen him off. The letters that never came. The long nights on the front lines, fleeting thoughts of a family he might never have. And now, it all seemed to converge in one simple moment, three children with the same birthmark as his. He wanted to believe. Yet he hesitated. The past had taught him that every clue must be verified, that every assumption could be a trap. The battlefield had left him vigilant and, simultaneously, fearful of hope that might shatter. He bowed his head slightly, inhaled deeply, keeping the tremor in his chest hidden. His fingers clenched, then released. The firelight danced across the four wrists, three small ones, and one soldier's, as if marking a shared imprint, undeniable. The children whispered again, shorter this time, as though they had practiced these words. Mom said. Dad would find us. Mom said, don't be afraid. Simple, fragmented words, each carrying immense weight, falling into Daniel's chest like metal scraping against bone. He never imagined Laura remembered him, let alone entrusted a message through her children. He sat quietly for a long while, eyes fixed on the fire shrinking to a red glow. In the silence, the fragments coalesced, the photo in the wooden box, Laura's smile, three infants, identical birthmarks, the whispered mom's gone, and the trembling word dad. They formed a half-light, half-shadow portrait. Part of him wanted to cry, another part clenched, forbidding weakness. He could not let hope mislead him if the truth turned out different. Yet he could not ignore the strange coincidences slowly tightening around him. Outside, the southern night grew heavy. Frogs croaked from the pond, insects answered in echoing rhythm. A gust rattled the paper on the table, like an invisible hand reminding him that the past was far from over. Daniel placed his hand on his chest, feeling his heart race unnaturally. Back from the battlefield, he thought nothing could make him tremble anymore. But here, before three children, he realized fear remained, fear that he was not enough, fear that he had arrived too late. He looked at each one, eyes slowing, memorizing. No promises were spoken, but one thought carved itself deep: if these were truly his children, he would never walk away again. And even without certainty, these three, with their trembling breaths and pale red marks, had already become a part of the responsibility he could not refuse. That night, as the children fell asleep in the corner of the porch, the old blanket covering their shoulders, Daniel leaned back against the wooden wall. His hand remained on his wrist, where the hidden birthmark lay beneath the skin. In the darkness, he closed his eyes, breathing slowly. The truth was still unclear, but he knew, from this point, his journey was no longer about finding shelter. It had become a journey to find himself, through the eyes of these three innocent children. That afternoon, a fine drizzle fell over the red dirt road. Puddles mirrored the dull gray of the sky, casting the landscape in the impression of a cold, damp blanket. Daniel was just rearranging a few window planks when a rasping engine sound carried from afar. Heavy, familiar, the kind that spoke of worn-out machines, each rev rasping like a horse cough. He set down the hammer, listening closely. Over the patter of rain, the engine's growl became harsher, a saw blade tearing through the stillness. Through the curtain of rain, an old truck appeared, its paint mottled with patches of mossy green and silver, the bed crusted with mud. It idled slowly, then rolled to a stop right in front of the rusty iron gate of the farm. Daniel stood on the porch, motionless, scanning the scene out of habit, deep tire tracks pressed into the wet earth, a dense plume of black smoke puffing from the exhaust. The truck door screeched open, and a man stepped out. Carl Benson. The man was in his 40s, broad-shouldered but slightly paunchy, with a rugged face carved with sun-weathered lines. His beard was unkempt, and his small eyes bore the faint red of irritation, detached and cold. On his shoulder hung an old canvas bag, its contents spilling out a few cheap dry goods, instant noodles, soggy crackers, some tin cans of meat. Nothing for children, no care for nutrition or tenderness. Carl walked to the gate without knocking or announcing himself. He opened the latch and entered the yard as though it were a temporary storage site. His mud-streaked boots pressed heavy prints into the earth. He didn't glance at the shattered window frame, didn't notice the soft laughter of wind flicking through the corrugated roof. He went straight to the porch, dropping the bag onto the wooden floor with a thump that scattered a few packs of noodles, then turned away as if his task were done. No greeting. No glance for the three children huddled behind Daniel. Daniel stood tall, his chest filling with a familiar feeling, not the alertness of danger, but a quiet, simmering frustration. He had seen prisoners abandoned, had seen the cold indifference of eyes toward another's suffering. Now that same gaze was on the face of the man who had tossed the goods like a burden. Carl's voice, hoarse and hollow, muttered something, though it was unclear to whom. Enough to last a few days. Don't make a sound. His words lacked warmth, more a command cast to the wind. He pivoted on his heel, ignoring the three children, ignoring Daniel entirely, as though they were shadows. The three kids shrank back. The smallest tugged at Daniel's shirt, head downcast, eyes glistening but silent. The middle one bit their lip lightly, shoulders trembling, and the eldest clenched their fists, silently following Carl's retreating figure. Daniel drew a deep breath. Overlapping images filled his mind, Laura in the photo, the faded birthmark on the wrist, the whispered promise "Daddy will come back," and now this stranger who threw a few dry rations and left. Together, they painted a crooked portrait. These children had lived off such meager packages, relying on such cold neglect for years. Carl moved toward the truck. Daniel remained still, watching every motion. Rain grew heavier, splashing loudly on the roof of the vehicle. Carl pulled the door, climbed into the cab, his worn leather jacket darkened with wet streaks. He did not look back, did not inspect, did not say another word. The engine roared to life, spitting smoke again into the damp air. The truck slowly rolled forward, turning at the gate. For a fleeting moment, its headlights swept across Daniel's face. He did not flinch, only held his gaze, letting the light illuminate the creases on his face, the eyes that held a feeling he had not dared to name, rage. The vehicle vanished into the rain, leaving behind the sharp scent of diesel. The farmyard returned to silence, but this silence was heavier, weighted, like the calm after gunfire. Daniel bent to pick up the canvas bag. Inside were the hollow, cheap goods, barely enough to feed one child, let alone three. He placed it on the wooden table, his fingers brushing against the clumps of mud on the tin cans. Cold, dirty, heartless. The three children remained huddled on the porch. They did not rush forward to claim the bag, nor did they show anticipation. Their eyes, tired and indifferent, lingered on it as if accustomed to this routine. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. The smallest whispered, barely audible over the rain. "He just brings stuff and leaves." Daniel did not answer. He simply nodded, turning to watch the rain-soaked yard. The deep tire tracks remained in the earth, and they were not just impressions, they were etched into his memory, proof of neglect. He knew he stood at a crossroads. If he stayed silent, the children would grow up in the cold shadow of such visits, surviving on cheap rations, breathing in the indifference of a man who should have cared. Yet within Daniel, another spark was screaming. He could not turn away, could not repeat the mistakes he had once made with Laura. Rain continued to fall, drumming on the old tin roof. Daniel laid his hand on the latch, the cold damp seeping into his skin. He looked inside, where the children's eyes still searched his, quietly waiting for an answer. No promises had been made yet, but in that silence, a slow determination formed. This time, he would not walk away. Benson had almost climbed into the driver's seat when he stopped, turning his head. The headlights swept across Daniel's face, highlighting the tense lines of his jaw. He saw the three children huddled on the porch, then glanced at Daniel, a brief look, heavy like a leaden cloud ready to spill its rain. His gaze darkened, thick and opaque, the color of machine oil smeared across an old leather jacket. He turned fully, taking a few steps deeper into the yard, his heavy boots squishing into the mud with each step. His voice was hoarse, abrupt, and needed no audience, cutting straight into the damp air. The children were a burden. They needed nothing beyond a leaky roof and scraps of food. Each word fell on the porch floor like rusted nails. The youngest flinched, stumbled back a step, hands reaching out to find something to hold onto, and landed on the leg of Daniel's pants. A tiny, freezing hand gripped tightly. Daniel lowered his eyes, noticing the small knuckles blanching white, a faint reddish bruise peaked at the wrist. A surge of heat erupted from deep within his chest, spreading through his arm, pooling in the hand that clutched instinctively. Since leaving the military, he had avoided every confrontation. He had learned to remain silent, to sit through inner storms until they passed. But now, those lessons fell away. Rage surged, bright and steady like a lightning bolt striking flat ground. It was not noisy, not chaotic, it was firm, restrained, and breathed like a sealed furnace. Benson lifted a foot and kicked lightly at the bag Daniel had just set on the porch table, sending it sliding, as if flicking dust from a sleeve. The small gesture shifted the air. The two older children pressed close together, shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the mud-stained boots. Daniel leaned slightly forward, positioning half his body between the porch and the yard, creating an invisible barrier between Benson and the children. He said nothing. His chest heaved, yet his breathing fell into the rhythm he had used on stakeouts: deep inhale, slow exhale, not losing balance. Rain streaked along the corrugated roof, dripping along the edge of the porch, each drop seemed to count the beat. Somewhere, the cooling metal of the truck creaked and hissed, sounding like teeth grinding together. Benson smirked. His gaze measured Daniel, shoulder width, stance, distance from boot to edge of wooden step. In that instant, Daniel's old drills reawakened, left foot half a step back, center of gravity low, arms relaxed but tendons subtly taut at the back of the hands. Not for attack. To stand firm, unshaken. They need nothing more, Benson repeated, his voice coarse as gravel. A gust swept across the yard, tossing a few dry straw strands. One brushed the smallest child's cheek, it shrank closer to Daniel's leg. Daniel placed a hand on the soaking hair, a reflexive gesture, no promise, no declaration, just a quiet shield. From his palm, he felt the tiny tremor of a body accustomed to curling up and waiting for the cold to pass. The anger still burned in his chest, but it began to change form, from fiery flare to steady glow, from wanting to explode to wanting to endure. He understood the fragility of such moments: one shouted word, one overstepping stride, and everything could shatter. Cruelty favored noise, kindness required space to breathe. Benson glanced at the children for the first time, eyes drifting over the 3 empty bins. No recognition, no connection. Daniel saw there the icy detachment he had encountered at the edges of supply depots. An indifference that allowed people to endure themselves. The cold reminded him of wind-bitten nights, hugging a rifle like it was a small, tenuous flame. Only now, the flame was clutching his pant leg. He stepped back half a pace, drawing the children deeper under the porch, shielding them from the rain. His movements were slow, smooth, like guiding a small boat to shore. Benson noticed, pursed his lips, then let out a dry chuckle, brief enough to barely count as sound. He pivoted half around as if to leave, but lingered, letting the weight of his words hang longer in the damp porch air. Daniel remained silent. In the quiet, he could hear the rain hitting the metal bins, the suppressed gasp he had just held back. His chest was still warm, but his eyes had cooled. The anger had helped him stand straight, restraint kept him from crossing the line he had drawn. Finally, Benson shrugged, like a bored craftsman. He turned his back, mud clinging to the heels with every step. Near the truck, he paused, glancing toward the porch one last time, a brief, icy glance that left its mark. No warning, no threat. Just a slick presence: I come, I throw, I go. The door slammed. The engine roared, exhaling black smoke, mixing with the rain into a gray haze. The truck rolled out of the gate, leaving 2 muddy ruts behind, splashing water into foam. The engine faded into a weary hum that dissolved into the distant pond. Silence returned, but not the empty kind. It was dense, shaped, rhythmic, rains beat, breaths beat, hearts beat after a battle without gunfire. Daniel lowered the tiny hand from his pant leg into his own. Skin against skin, cold at first, warming gradually. The faint pink mark reappeared. He traced it lightly with his thumb, as if placing a fingerprint on a map to mark a place he would return to. The 2 older children stayed close, their black eyes no longer just frightened. In their depth, he glimpsed something like fragile trust, shards of glass unsharpened, reflecting a small glimmer. That afternoon, the autumn wind stirred the yellow leaves, spinning them in circles before they settled onto the rotting wooden steps. Daniel sat motionless, back against the porch post, the phone trembling in his calloused hands. A message had appeared short, just a few characters, yet heavier than any rucksack of ammunition he had once carried, 99.9%. He read it over and over, his fingers clutching so tightly the knuckles had turned white. His eyes were glued to the screen, as if blinking might make the words vanish, dissolve into illusion. 99.9%. Not a guess, not a hazy memory. The truth had arrived, cold and bright. He was the father of these 3 children. Daniel breathed rapidly, a torrent of sensations flooding him as it had when he ran across the battlefield, heart hammering in chaotic rhythm. His breath mingled with the chill wind, heavy with the scent of damp earth. He bowed his head, hands clasped tightly, back hunched as if trying to fold the world into himself. For years, he had evaded the past, letting it slip away like a river with no turn. But now, these 3 small humans were his blood, a proof etched in every strand of hair, every drop of blood. There was no turning back. From somewhere inside the house came soft giggles, the children, small, hesitant but real. The sound was a tether, drawing him upright. A fleeting relief spread through him, layered over anxiety, forming a chaos he could not name. His eyes closed, lashes heavy. In the darkness, Grace's face appeared, gentle as the afternoon at the bus station long ago. He whispered, barely audible, "I'm back, Grace. Late, but I'm here." Yet immediately after that solace came a slicing thought: this truth was only the beginning. Benson would not let go easily. His shadow, his raspy voice calling the children burdens, still lingered on the porch. The next battle would not take place on sun-scorched deserts or in humid jungles, but behind the faded yellow walls of the county courthouse, in the eyes of the townspeople. Daniel remained still, letting leaves drift around his shoes. Above, heavy gray clouds signaled another coming rain. He knew now, he was no longer fighting for honor, nor for orders. He was about to enter a different battle, fighting to protect the children, to hold on to a family he had never imagined he could have. And this time, he would not lose. The court session opened one winter morning, with mist still clinging to the skeletal trees around the town. The courthouse was a small, aging yellow brick building, its brown roof mottled, walls stained by time. Inside, the chamber was modest, wooden chairs creaking under every subtle shift. The air was thick with anticipation, smelling of old paint and decades-old paper. Daniel sat in the left row, back straight, hands gripping the bench. His gaze did not wander. It was fixed forward, on the long table draped in green cloth, where the judge sat behind a pile of case files. Beside him, his young attorney, Samantha Davis, held eyes sharp yet calm. Behind him, the 3 children huddled together, wide-eyed, frightened, yet fixated on him as though he were their anchor. The wooden door creaked open. Benson entered, wearing a worn coat, frayed cuffs, his face shaved roughly to reveal streaks of grayed skin. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Daniel, a flicker of darkness in them. He took the seat opposite Daniel, slamming a few crumpled papers onto the table, old, yellowed guardianship documents with faded ink signatures. When the judge asked him to speak, Benson rose, voice hoarse, tone insolent. "I've cared for them since their mother passed. I have legal papers proving my guardianship. That soldier has no relation." His voice echoed heavily, as if trying to suppress every other sound in the chamber. But when Samantha stood, her words came sharp, deliberate, cutting through the decay like a needle through rotten fabric. She presented each witness. Mrs. Hale recounted Grace's illness and death, and her trust placed in a soldier. Tom and Clara Hughes described Benson's purchases of liquor, his neglect of the children's food. Store receipts corroborated their accounts, every claim matched reality. Piece by piece, the evidence assembled a picture impossible to deny. Benson did not care for the children, he had exploited them. The courtroom atmosphere thickened. Daniel sat motionless, eyes forward, yet his chest hammered like a drum. He remembered the 99.9% message still resting in his phone, the ironclad proof he had guarded until the last moment. Then the moment arrived. The judge nodded. The courtroom door opened, and the children were brought forward. They took their seats in the witness stand, their little legs swinging unsteadily, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. The judge spoke gently, prompting each to recount their experiences. Soft whispers fragmented, "We were often hungry," he would only yell, "Some days he made us skip meals." Voices trembled, some breaking, tears staining pant legs. The room fell silent. No pen scratched, no one exhaled loudly. Only the honest, fragile voices of children filled the air, slicing through the stillness. Daniel bowed his head, fists clenched. He had never trembled at gunfire, yet in that instant, his heart shook. Not from fear, but from understanding. These children had lived years in shadows, and now, they had to speak out to protect themselves. The judge tapped the gavel lightly, allowing them to step down. Daniel turned, catching their gaze. Red-rimmed eyes, yet a spark glimmered, a fragile ray of hope. He nodded subtly, lips pressed tight, silently promising them, things were about to change. Across the table, Benson glared, face rigid. The old papers in his hand now seemed like fragments of nothingness. The room remained hushed, waiting for the gavel to strike. An ending had not yet been spoken, but the breath of truth already hung heavily, pressing upon every shoulder. The small courtroom of the town was bathed in the pale light of late afternoon, filtering through dusty window panes. The yellow-painted walls had faded into mottled patches, the ceiling fan creaked as it turned lazily, and the wooden chairs groaned every time someone shifted. The air was taut, stretched like a string pulled tight. Every gaze was fixed on the court clerk's desk, where a slim file lay neatly in place. Daniel sat there, back straight, hands clasped so tightly that the joints turned white. He had been sitting like that for hours, unmoving, like a statue carved from stone. Yet inside, a storm raged. Memories of the battlefield surged, long nights in the dugout, shells screaming overhead, waiting for the moment between life and death. Today, there were no gunshots, but his heart pounded just the same, relentless, dizzying. The court clerk opened the file. The rustle of paper sounded sharp, slicing through the tense silence like a knife. Daniel swallowed dryly, his shoulders trembling slightly. He had prepared for every possible outcome, but deep in his chest, he knew he was waiting for just one thing. He remembered the faint red marks on the wrists of the three children, the old photograph in the wooden box, the fragile dad whispered from the shadowed porch. He wanted to believe, but he had never allowed himself to fully trust. The voice read slowly, clearly. DNA test, the probability of a match between Mr. Daniel Reeves and the three children, 99.9%. One sentence. The room fell utterly silent, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Daniel felt as though a massive weight pressing on his chest for months had finally been lifted. His ears buzzed, his vision blurred, but the number illuminated his mind, sharper than any engraving on a military ID, 99.9%. He was their father. Not a hypothesis, not a shadow. The truth laid bare, like the scar etched on his shoulder. He bowed his head, eyes closing. In his heart, Grace's image returned. Her patient smile, her deep gentle eyes. He remembered that morning, standing on the porch, watching him walk away. She had not cried, only nodded. He had thought that memory would remain a wound never healed. Yet today, through a cold, clinical number, she seemed to return, placing the three children into his hands, whispering, "They are yours." Across from him, Benson's face hardened. The man who had once shouted, once gestured accusingly, now stared in darkness, crushing the old guardianship papers in his hands. He knew that before this cold number, all his excuses turned to dust. His broad shoulders shrank, suddenly lost, like a man who had lost his footing. Daniel turned back to the three children. They sat quietly, eyes wide. They did not understand DNA, or what a percentage meant. But instinctively, they sensed that something had changed. The youngest, tousled hair damp with tears, leaned toward him. Daniel gave a small nod. A spark flared in the child's eyes, a tiny flame igniting after the rain. No one spoke further. There was no need. The number 99.9% filled the room entirely. Daniel sat there, his heartbeat slowing. He knew one battle had ended. Yet, simultaneously, another had just begun, the battle of responsibility, of love, of sleepless nights caring instead of guarding on the battlefield. He lifted his gaze, eyes brighter, shoulders straighter. He was ready. The old judge rapped his gavel lightly on the bench. 3 sharp, even strikes, cock, 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 sounded, as if closing an old door. He lifted his head, his voice deep and resonant, echoing through the room. After reviewing the evidence, the DNA test results, and the witness statements, the court declares, the guardianship and custody of the 3 children shall belong to Mr. Daniel Reeves. The words fell like stones, landing in every heart. No one spoke. No one moved. The small courtroom, narrow and worn, was suddenly filled with a new silence, the silence of justice, of a decision that could not be reversed. Daniel remained still. The gavel echoed in his ears, stirring an unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. He did not leap to his feet. He did not speak. He simply sat, eyes distant, as if the light streaming through the window opened a path to a different world. Years of warfare had taught him to obey many orders, to live and die by the whistle of commands. But never had an order carried such weight as these words. It was more than a verdict. It was a return, a recognition that he was allowed to be a father. A warmth touched his hand. Daniel looked down, a small hand grasped his finger, trembling yet firm. Another hand followed, stronger but still tense. Finally, the third, stubborn, clenching as if afraid he might vanish. 3 hands stacked on his weathered one, carrying all trust, all longing. Daniel turned. 3 small faces looked up. Eyes bright and glistening. In that gaze, there was no fear, no hesitation. There was a sense of reassurance he had never known. The oldest whispered first, clear and sure. Dad. A single word, yet it poured like a stream. The other 2 followed, in unison. Dad. The calls echoed through the room. No longer trembling like that first night. No longer tentative. It was a recognition, a beginning of a bond of blood. Daniel felt his eyes sting. Tears welled silently, streaming down. He bowed his head, holding the 3 small hands. No words were needed. His silence was a promise. I am here. I will not leave. Lawyer Samantha offered a quiet smile. Spectators exchanged glances, heads bowed, letting the moment pass in reverence. No applause, no cheers. Only a profound, beautiful quiet. The kind that follows a storm, when the earth ceases to scream and absorbs the rain. In a corner, Benson lowered his head. The old papers in his hands crumpled, meaningless. His shoulders slumped, the dark shadow on the wall shrinking to nothing. He was no longer anything to the children. Daniel looked through the window. Pale light fell upon the streaked hair of gray and the 3 faces huddled close to him. In that light, he realized, life had changed. No more duty, no more guns. Only the path ahead, leading home. The word Dad echoed once more, together, resonating like a small but steadfast song. It merged with his heartbeat, erasing the shadows of war that lingered. In that small courtroom, a family was born. No engravings, no vows required. Just one word, enough to shape a lifetime, Dad. The red dirt road stretched ahead like a muted ribbon, fine dust clinging to the tires, leaving behind a faint haze. The afternoon slowed between rows of trees, their shadows stretching long, the sky rustling with the late chirps of birds. Daniel drove in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel firmly, the cool metal under his palms keeping him alert. The 3 children sat in the back, occasionally tilting their heads to watch sunlight streak across the fields, then returning their attention to the fraying drawstring on their father's old backpack. When the weathered wooden street sign appeared, narrow, low, like a memory, Daniel turned into the familiar dirt track. The rusty iron gate emerged slowly, its faded blue paint peeling away to reveal the silver-gray metal beneath. The house stood there, quiet, waiting, just as it had the first time he saw it. But today, it was slightly different, like an old face just hearing good news, the corners of its eyes softening. Daniel cut the engine and sat for a long beat, letting his heart settle into a slower rhythm. He opened the door. His boots touched the damp ground, the smell of wet grass from last night's rain rising cold. The 3 children darted out first, then paused, as if remembering this was no longer a place to tread lightly. The youngest looked back for him. Daniel nodded gently, a single nod saying more than words could. He set the toolbox on the porch. The lid popped open to reveal familiar items: a hammer with a smooth wooden handle, a worn handsaw, a dusty bag of round nails, a tape measure with frayed edges, a paint scraper. Daniel spread a small tarp, arranging everything neatly in order. An old habit: before every task, everything had to be in its proper place. The children crouched down, curiously touching each item. The eldest rolled the tape measure, smiling softly as it snapped back into itself. The middle child counted nails, face serious as if solving an important equation. The youngest touched the cold hammerhead, recoiling slightly, then looked at his father, eyes waiting. "Let's get started." Daniel didn't speak loudly. He carried the hammer and approached the porch post with rot at its base. The wood was deeply hollowed, moss clinging green. He tested the hammer on the grain, feeling the softness, then stepped back toward the pile of lumber he had brought from town. Each plank of pine was straight-grained, the scent of fresh resin sharp. Daniel placed the first plank on the sawhorse, arms pulling evenly. The saw made a dry, steady sound, like a rhythmic breath. Sawdust sprayed, clinging to his forearms, falling onto the steps like brown snow. The sound of the hammer began, steady, even, unhurried, tap, tap, tap. With each strike, the wood slowly sealed against the post, old cracks covered by a smooth plane. The children squinted under the porch roof, watching each movement. They began passing nails. The eldest opened the bag, removing each nail with a fingernail, placing them in his cupped hand. The middle child handed small wedges Daniel had pre-cut, keeping fingertips away from the saw as instructed. The youngest, tasked with holding the sweat rag, approached timidly with each hammer strike, then ran back to sit, hugging his knees, eyes wide with fascination. Daniel removed the warped section of the porch roof, the rusty sheet metal clanging. He adjusted the new sheet, applying a layer of black waterproof sealant, securing it with two small wood strips, screws piercing through the metal into the joists, the drill whining softly with each turn. Wind blew through, the porch roof had no more gaps, and sunlight reached a little deeper into the room. He paused, listening. No more slow drips from the familiar leak. Only the midday insects and the even, quiet breathing of three children. By noon, he paused repairing the roof and moved to the steps. The old planks were cracked, nail heads protruding like chipped teeth. Daniel pried each plank, glancing at his level. Fingers tracing the worn wood, he measured the new lengths with the tape measure. He called the eldest over, showing him how to read the numbers along the edge, mark with pencil. The little one pursed lips, drew a short line, the digits crooked, but eyes brightened as Daniel nodded. The new plank was laid down, nails sunk flush with the surface. The middle child rubbed beeswax on each nail head to smooth it, a small trick Daniel remembered from fixing the old guard post years ago. Everything fit together, the steps sounding solid, dry, firm, no more creaks. He opened the kitchen window, removing the broken glass stuck in the frame. Shards refracted sunlight into tiny sparkling fragments on the floor. Daniel swept them into a corner, poured them into a bucket, covering with a rag to prevent anyone from stepping on them. The new glass, held with both hands, fit snugly in the groove. He pressed the rubber seal lightly, ensuring a tight fit. The kitchen now received real light, not the dim haze through dust. The dust seemed to change color, from dull gray to pale gold, floating like tiny fish in still water. In the afternoon, he propped a wooden ladder against the roof to inspect the junction between the main roof and the porch. The three children clustered around, holding the base like tiny guards. Daniel climbed, shoulders brushing the low tree canopy, the scents of resin and damp leaves mingling. He hammered down the loose nails along the edge. From above, he saw the patchy sunlit yard, the shadows of the three children sticking to the ladder's shadow like three short exclamation points. In the distance, faded children's clothes still hung on the line, swaying silently in the breeze. He stepped down, removed the old line, replaced it with a new rope, tied a double knot, the same knot he once used to lower supplies from a helicopter. The children brought out old school clothes, carefully replacing broken wooden clothespins with new ones he had bought with nails. Each movement slow, deliberate, as if each piece of clothing were a tiny flag. Late afternoon, Daniel moved to the fence. The rotted posts leaned, barbed wire sagged. He removed the old posts, filled the holes, drove in new posts, straight as a drawn line. He stretched the wire, the pliers snapping the excess with a high ting. The eldest counted posts, the middle ran to fetch extra clips, the youngest hugged a coil of wire like a kitten. Each time the wire snapped into place, they all flinched then laughed. Sharp, brief laughter, but real, cutting across the yard and sticking somewhere in the dark green canopy. Then came the well. The old wooden cover was rotten, hinges loose, the pulley squealed. Daniel removed the hinges, oiled them, replaced the doubled rope. He scrubbed the tin bucket, filling it with a few scoops of water. The water wasn't bitterly cold for the season, just deeply refreshing. He set an aluminum basin on the porch steps, pouring in warm water from the kitchen pot. The three children sat on an old towel, washing hands and feet, bubbles running between toes. The accumulated dirt from old days dissolved into brown streaks in the water. Daniel sat across, holding the towel, drying the youngest's hair. Sweat-damp strands slowly puffed into soft fibers. He said nothing, just wiped carefully, behind the neck, over a small scrape on the pillow he had not noticed before. By evening, he built a fire in the kitchen. No longer the smell of thin, cold porridge from the first night. The aroma of fried onions, sliced potatoes, and beef simmered with bay leaves Daniel had borrowed from Mrs. Hale. The pot lid rattled slightly, steam rising to the new window, forming tiny droplets that slid down, leaving clear streaks like water brush lines on paper. He arranged bowls, placed wooden spoons in each, hands steady now. The children sat at the table, back straighter, no longer huddling defensively. They blew gently on the soup, spoons clinking against bowls, a small, steady rhythm, the soundtrack of a peaceful evening. After dinner, Daniel gathered the dishes, rolled up sleeves, washing under the well faucet. The soap suds were now clear, abundant, smelling cheap but clean. The eldest handed a towel, the middle stacked dishes to dry, the youngest tiptoed to place a spoon into a tall jar. Occasionally, their hands bumped, followed by a quick sorry and a smile, elbows brushing lightly. Daniel looked out the window, the darkness thickening, early fireflies flickering tiny green dots in the grass. Before bedtime, he dragged a low wooden crate onto the porch, placing the original wooden box atop it. An old photo went into a simple frame, wood Daniel had cut himself that afternoon. Laura Grace sat center, holding 3 newborns. Under the oil lamp, her smile tinged with a thin golden warmth. Daniel set the frame on a small makeshift shelf, held up by 2 planks and metal brackets, right by the kitchen window. Not a shrine, not a proclamation. Just a reminder for anyone passing by to see and remember a person who had gone before. Night fell completely. The wind outside eased, sliding through the new fence, no longer whistling through porch gaps. That night, the sky closed with a thin veil of mist. The distant fields fell silent, tractors long stilled, leaving only streaks of fireflies hovering along the newly stretched fence, blinking like tiny lanterns. Inside, the oil lamp cast a gentle golden halo on the wooden walls, the shadows of 4 figures overlapping and then separating like ripples. Instead of the cold, watery porridge that used to linger in the kitchen, tonight the room smelled of hearty stew, tender beef with potatoes, carrots, and a few bay leaves. The lid of the pot trembled softly, steam forming droplets on the freshly installed glass, trickling down in clear streaks like watercolor lines across a page. Daniel ladled the soup into old enamel bowls. Each bowl came with a roughly toasted slice of bread, brown just enough for the butter to melt into the air. He placed the bowls before the children, without urging, without reminders. They had already learned to wait for each other. The eldest glanced at the others, nodded slightly, spoon tapping the bowl with a soft sound, then the heat was dispersed in little puffs of breath. Here, everything moved slowly, just enough for warmth to seep gradually into their bodies. As they ate, small stories began to surface across the table like bubbles on the stew's surface. The middle child pointed toward the door, whispering about a stray cat that often sat on the fence, still as a log, eyes glowing yellow like 2 sparks of fire. It had appeared that morning, its striped tail visible beneath a bush of sim bushes before vanishing like smoke. The youngest pointed to the wet slippers on the porch and murmured that someone had licked the milk left in Daniel's enamel dish. The rim bore a crescent-shaped tongue mark. Daniel listened, ladled more soup for them, and placed some soft bones on a small plate. He didn't say, "I'll catch it tomorrow," or "Don't touch." He merely pushed the plate of bones toward the windowsill, leaving it there as a polite invitation. The eldest took a deep breath and brought up the next story, the rusty bike at the far end of the yard. It lay beneath the oak tree, its blue paint faded to the color of old seawater, saddle torn, chain stiff and frozen like a scar. Today, it had tried to stand upright, the front wheel spun halfway before halting. The story came with few words but many gestures. Daniel listened, a small smile tugging at his lips. He looked out the window. In the darkness, the bike blended into the blackened tree trunk, only a faint reflection glimmering on the handlebar bell. He nodded slowly, as if adding a new task to the kitchen wall's ongoing to-do list. The children ate heartily. The clatter of spoons, the quiet snap of breaking bread. On one corner of the table, the old tablecloth bore a small burn mark, the size of a fingertip, the trace of days when the kitchen had only been a kitchen, not a home. Daniel glanced at it, neither erasing nor covering it. He left it there, a reminder of the path traveled. After dinner, they gathered around him. Daniel brought out a box of tools to the porch ledge. A half-full bottle of machine oil, a small wire brush, a clean rag. He motioned, and all three children pulled up chairs, slipped on their shoes, and stepped onto the porch. Night had fully fallen, the cold earthy scent of wet soil rising. In the yard, the bike teetered, half upright, saddle leaning toward the fence, handlebar slightly bent. Daniel steadied the bike with his left hand on the frame, brushing the chain with the wire brush in his right. The metallic screech broke the silence, rusty particles spraying in fine brown droplets. The middle child held out the rag. Daniel wiped, then applied a thin drop of oil on the chain, spinning the pedals slowly so it absorbed evenly. The chain started to move, from stiff to smooth, like a knee regaining motion after long immobility. The eldest adjusted the brakes, fingers delicate yet determined. The youngest stood slightly back, careful not to step on stray screws. The wind brushed past, grass rustling along the path, whispering secrets. The stray cat appeared at the base of the fence, just as the story had said. It froze, eyes fixed yellow, ears twitching with the breeze. Daniel placed the plate of bones on a low step and stepped back. The cat sniffed, licked quickly, stretched, and vanished into the bushes like a fold of night. Returning to the bike, Daniel lowered the saddle a notch to fit. He held the handlebars, motioning for the eldest to mount. Legs straddled, knees trembling slightly, shoulders tight as a cord. Daniel steadied the back of the saddle, gave a gentle push. Wheels rolled, chain hissed softly, brakes squeaked a thin thread. A few meters on, the child wobbled, planted feet. The middle clapped too loudly, making all three laugh. Second attempt, wheels straighter. Third, spine more relaxed, chin lowered, breathing even. Daniel stood behind, silent. The children's laughter guided them more than any instruction. Next, the middle child mounted. Pants caught on the chain once, oil spraying tiny black dots on the fabric. Frowning, Daniel lightly touched the shoulder, sliding the pants away from the chain with a gesture as gentle as adjusting a collar before a photograph. A few more rounds, night wind on their cheeks, soft giggles slicing through the mist. The youngest sat on the saddle, feet barely touching the pedals, letting Daniel push along a short stretch. Head tilted back, eyes closed, as if the wind carried them up an invisible hill. When the kitchen called with the scent of warm milk and cinnamon, all four returned indoors. Daniel poured milk into a small pot, stirring with a wooden spoon to prevent scorching. He sprinkled a little ground cinnamon into each cup, the brown powder dissolved on the creamy surface, warm flecks floating. The children clasped cups with both hands, lips brushing lightly, blowing, sipping, leaving tiny white mustaches. The youngest smeared milk on the tip of the nose. The eldest used a finger to dab it, smiling silently. The kitchen table now featured small stones collected from the ditch, lined up like a school of fish. A fallen feather stood upright in a chipped cup, like a tiny flag. Daniel sat opposite, back against the wall, eyes sweeping across these small treasures as if inspecting a private hoard. Poverty had not yet left the house, but its chill had eased. Within the scarcity was room for collecting and arranging, for stone puzzles, for a tiny feather flag. Little stories resumed. The eldest spoke of the hollow tree behind the well. Inside, old bottle casings emitting a sharp, acrid smell. The middle asked if they could paint the white window tomorrow to reflect more light. The youngest claimed to hear tapping within the walls, perhaps crickets, or some creatures still adjusting to new humans? Daniel nodded, adding another checkmark to his mental list. The wall would be patched, but first, the children would press their ears to it one more time. The bike would get a new rear tube. The cat would be named, maybe Smoke, since it appeared like a wisp and disappeared the same. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the scent of fresh grass through the slightly open kitchen door. Daniel stood, cracked the door to let the aroma in, then closed it. He cleaned the cups, washing each under the well water, placing them upside down on a clean cloth. The children tidied their chairs, wiped milk spills with wrung-out rags. No reminders were needed. Small tasks found their new owners, like a shirt finding its shoulder. Bedtime came. Daniel pulled the thick cover over the mattresses. The youngest clutched the small round stone collected earlier. Daniel removed it, placing it on the windowsill as a promise for tomorrow. The middle drew the cover up to the nose, eyes closing. The eldest gazed at the ceiling, still restless. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, hand resting lightly on the child's knee, the right weight for a familiar heart to know it was safe. Slowly, eyelids closed. In the kitchen, the fire had gone out, but the aroma of stew clung to the walls like a thick warmth. The cat returned, leapt lightly to the porch, curled its tail, staring through the glass. Daniel caught the yellow gaze, neither shooing nor calling. He raised his hand to chest height in a silent greeting. The cat flicked its ear and disappeared again. Back at the table, Daniel rearranged his to-do list with a stub of pencil: wheels, rear tube, brakes, tighten, windows, white paint, walls, fill cracks, wind chimes, porch. Beneath that, he wrote a line he never thought he would: tell a story before bed, one little story each night. He wasn't good at storytelling. But now, stories existed already, in the scattered little things: the feather, the stone, the cat, the handlebar bell. The oil lamp burned low. Daniel adjusted the wick, the light shrank to a golden bead, then thinned. The house sank into a soft darkness, like a quilt. Somewhere along the fence, a faint rustle. The wind no longer whistled under the new roof, it breathed evenly. And inside the room, the giggles from earlier hadn't completely faded, as if they lingered in the corners of the ceiling, waiting to be called back tomorrow evening. The first day of a new routine had begun like this: no fanfare, no trumpets, only the scent of a hearty stew replacing the smell of thin gruel, small stories taking the place of prolonged silence, and a man sitting quietly, a modest smile on his lips. Here, in the quiet southern town, peace did not arrive through grand promises, but through the steady rhythm of a daytime hammer and the soft fall of children's laughter at night. They came together to form a roof stronger than wood, stronger than nails, strong as the habit of a heart learning again how to stay still, how to listen, and how to answer with kindness. The morning opened with the smell of damp earth and the lingering mist on the clothesline. Sunlight moved slowly through the new fence, casting a slanted streak like a ribbon laid across the grass. The front yard, once overrun with wild thistles, was now clear and level, the roots Daniel had pulled out lying bleached white like tiny bones. A few days ago, he had scattered Bermuda grass seeds, and in the evenings he watered them carefully. This morning, tiny green shoots had already poked through, fragile but resilient. On the edge of the porch, a wind chime made of old spoons and nails he had put together last night swayed slightly, the thin metal clinking softly, unassuming, just enough to let him know the wind was passing by. The children ran out into the yard while the sun was still low. They darted around like quails, leaving round footprints in the damp soil before moving onto the soft grass, giggling as their feet sank lightly. The bicycle, now oiled to a shine, spun freely, its bell ringing a soft ting. The oldest child pedaled slowly around the oak tree, glancing back as if waiting for someone to acknowledge, but no one spoke, and yet they understood, circling again on their own. The middle child chased a bright blue dragonfly, hands missing it as the wings twitched and disappeared into the sunlight. The youngest lay on the thin grass, propping their chin on their hands, counting the scattered clouds. Daniel sat on the porch steps, cradling a cup of coffee. The old ceramic mug was chipped at one corner, but warm, steam curling in a coil before dissipating. He stirred with a short wooden spoon, the gentle tapping on the mug sounded like a heartbeat marking the arrival of a new day. His left hand rested lightly on his knee, the veins running under the skin calmer than they had been in weeks. Before him lay the yard, and beyond that, the red dirt road, the old tire tracks erased by the wind. By the fence, the feral cat, now called Smoke by the family. sat curled up, yellow eyes squinting in the sunlight, as if keeping watch. He watched the children running back and forth. Every turn of the bicycle wheels, every footfall against the earth, was a new breath for the house. In the kitchen window, coffee smoke lingered, and the aroma of toasted bread from breakfast still clung to the air, mingling with the scent of fresh-cut grass. On the line, small clothes swayed, a muddy patch here, a fraying collar there, fluttering like little white flags signaling that this patch of land was now inhabited. This morning, he had risen early, before the birds. He swept the yard, gathered dry branches into a corner, and turned the soil near the porch to scatter leftover sawdust from last night's plank cutting. The sawdust retained moisture well, a trick he had learned from the carpenter who had repaired the watchtower back at the base. Each motion repeated slowly, yet it brought an odd sense of calm. During his military days, some mornings had passed in the span of a single command. Now, a morning stretched across a short list scribbled on a scrap of paper: sweep the yard, pull weeds, water the grass, place a flat stone for a bike stand, tighten the loose window trim on the east side. By the time the children awoke, the kitchen was warm, dishes neatly stacked. Breakfast was simple: slightly burnt scrambled eggs and toasted bread, with a bit of strawberry jam from Mrs. Hale. They ate quickly, backs straight, eyes drawn to the yard as if sunlight were pulling them outside. Daniel let them go first, carrying his cup of coffee to the porch and sitting quietly. At one time, he had thought stillness was a luxury. It turned out all it required was a leaky-free porch, a cup of black coffee, and a few distant, scattered voices of children. A pickup truck rumbled past the road, not stopping. Dust rose like a thin scarf tossed over the fence. Daniel set down his cup, rose, and walked along the yard boundary, inspecting the stakes he had set the day before, tugging gently on the wire, his fingers flicking a clear, crisp note. In the northeast corner where the soil pooled, leftover rainwater left dark streaks. He sprinkled white gravel to keep it dry. The eldest child skidded to a stop nearby, tracing the line with their bicycle, and looked up. Daniel pointed to the gravel. The child nodded, an understanding, almost ceremonial, acknowledgement of the path now made less treacherous. The middle child discovered a small bird nest in a low bush, a few loosely woven straw strands. They bent down, then lifted their gaze, eyes asking a question without words. Daniel approached, raised his index finger to his lips. He did not touch the nest, did not lift it. He only placed two small sticks, forming a tiny fence from nature itself, to signal that curious feet should keep their distance. The youngest stood slightly away, tilting their head, hair brushing their ear, smiling faintly. New household rules were formed through these subtle gestures: a stick here, a line of gravel there, a shared glance. Smoke patted across the grass, belly low, pausing near the gathering of dragonflies. He crouched, flicked his tail, lifted a front paw like a dancer rehearsing steps. The dragonflies scattered, leaving Smoke alone, who yawned, glanced at Daniel as if irritated, then moved to seek shade elsewhere. Daniel chuckled quietly, raised his coffee cup, and took a sip. The bitterness spread across his tongue, the roasted aroma sticking to the palate. In the past, bitterness had come with rations, with iron-tinged water. Today, it came with a blessed silence. On the porch, the old wooden chair was now propped with a small wedge, steady. He stretched his legs, heel brushing a worn spot on the second step. He thought he would sand and apply a light coat of primer at noon. Thin layers better than one thick one, a lesson learned while repairing a roof. The children still chased each other under the sun, their laughter no longer tentative. It broke, bounced off the grass, and struck the porch, sending the wind chime into a gentle tinkle. Mrs. Hale passed along the road, arms cradling an early basket of apples. She stopped by the fence, not entering, resting the basket against a new post. Daniel rose and went out. They nodded at each other. Her hand touched the freshly tightened wire, her eyes smiling. No words. No need. Sunlight painted a white streak across her silver hair. Smoke slinked quietly beneath the basket, stealing the scent of apples before slipping away. By noon, the oak tree cast deep shadows. The yard split into irregular squares of light and shade like a skewed chessboard. Daniel reseeded bare patches, pressing seeds gently into the soil with his boot. He adjusted the hose, letting water spray in a fine mist, not a rush. The children ran toward it, hands outstretched, faces tilted into the cooling spray. The eldest wheeled a bicycle through, droplets catching the sun like spinning wheels of light.
The middle hopped through shallow puddles, each step leaving fading imprints.
The youngest stretched their hands, counting 1, 2, 3, in rhythm with their breath.
Daniel set down the hose, letting it drip a thin thread.
Returning to the porch, he finished the last sip of coffee. The final bitterness sharpened his mind. In his head, the word-I began to shift. He no longer stood alone. This morning, he thought, we will paint the windows, we will fix the bike tubes, we will thicken the lawn. Verbs now carried new subjects, filling his chest not with pride, but with the fullness of a house inhabited. A long breeze swept through, the oak leaves rustling like dry rain. The wind chime tinkled. From the porch, he looked out at the road. The old dust settled, leaving only dark, damp soil. From a corner of memory, days of wandering in cheap rental rooms in other towns flickered, dinners eaten alone, TV substituting for conversation, shoes lined by the door as sentries for empty space. The old loneliness had echoed, touching no one. Now, echoes were replaced by running feet across the grass, the bells ting, the lazy cats meow. He stepped into the yard, bending to pick a leftover thistle spike by the fence, a dull tip, still capable of pricking if careless. He twirled it in his hand, then tossed it into the wooden trash bin. A small act. Yet it closed the line between past and present. The children ran past, their wind carrying the scent of clean sweat and sunlight.
The eldest paused a half-second, touching Daniel's elbow like marking a milestone, then ran on.
The middle child stretched Daniel's shadow with their feet, laughing. The youngest looked up, as if to ask, "What next this afternoon?"
Daniel gave no answer in words. He only waved toward the curve of flat stones in the yard.
They understood a new path was being laid, by stones, by grass, by footprints.
The coffee was gone, but its aftertaste lingered. The sun rose higher, and the new grass opened its eyes even more.
The front yard no longer held wild thorns, every inch of soil now had a name, a purpose. There were no victory flags planted along the fence, only a small child's cloth fluttering gently. No triumphal drums, just the soft chime of the wind chime. Daniel sat back down on the porch steps, hands resting on his knees, listening. Here, in the quiet southern town, an ordinary morning could be the deepest kind of salvation. It taught a person to breathe, it taught them to say we, it taught a man who had strayed too far down the road alone to find his way back with small, steady, gentle steps. The old house slowly changed color, like the bark of a seasoned tree after a long season of rain. The roof had been patched carefully, the joints no longer leaking in the night, each row of nails lay straight under the dark tin, glinting like scattered stars when touched by sunlight.
The front porch was held upright by two new wooden posts, their grain running warm and firm.
The fence had been rebuilt, its wire taut and humming faintly when tapped by a fingertip. The wind no longer whistled through, it now moved like a calm breath around the roof, like a wild creature that had stopped being cautious. Inside, light passed through the newly installed window panes, spilling into the room like clear water. On the wooden wall, a patch of white primer covered old stains, not hiding the marks of time but turning them into a canvas for something else, scribbled drawings taped up with brown packing tape. There was a round orange sun like a ball, a cat with a puffed belly, 3 stick figures wearing triangle hats standing next to a taller figure with longer arms. The corners of the papers curled, and Daniel secured one with a tiny nail, its gleaming head like a period at the end of a sentence. The wooden floor had been repaired where it had split wide. At the door to the porch, he sanded a long strip smooth so no feet would trip. On that strip were 2 parallel tracks. The small footprints of children running alongside the faded imprint of a soldier's boots. In the afternoon, when the sun tilted low, the shadows of these rows overlapped, forming a narrow path that led straight to the kitchen. Nearby, on a makeshift shelf Daniel had hurriedly built from 2 straight planks, 4 hooks held 3 worn children's jackets and 1 thick heavy coat. They brushed lightly against each other when the door opened, carrying the mingled scent of soap, oiled wood, sun-dried shoulders, and the lingering smell of old rain on a soldier's collar, a scent that somehow called the household back together. The kitchen table had been leveled. On its surface, a glass sugar jar with a lid and a labeled salt container prevented mix-ups. A small tin held nails and screws, each labeled in bold pen: short nails, porch; long nails, fence. Daniel said nothing, but this order was how he soothed his mind, each item in its place like each task finding its day. On the windowsill sat a chipped cup for smoke. Every morning he placed a few drops of warm milk, the cat leaving a faint crescent-shaped tongue mark. In the corner of the main room, Grace's framed photo rested on a low pine shelf he had built. Below, a small wooden box held trivial treasures collected by the children: a smooth stone from the ditch, a feather, a bottle cap, a stray button. Daniel didn't tidy these away. He understood that a home wasn't held up merely by posts or nails, but by small, seemingly meaningless things that were treasures to those who lived there. On the doorframe, he had marked each child's height with a pencil, faint lines that would grow bolder with each passing month. The bedrooms had been sealed at the seams, the wind no longer sneaking through at night to make the blankets ripple. 3 single beds fit snugly in the room, each covered in a mismatched blanket. One an old checkered hand-me-down from a neighbor, one a thin floral, one a navy blue from his days at the base. Above each bed hung a small reading lamp, affixed to a beam with metal clips. On every evening it lit at the same hour. Before turning off the lights, he sat on a low chair, flipping through a thin book with large text and many illustrations. He didn't narrate, but in his steady voice, he indicated the picture for the children to fill in the story. When their small voices faded, he quietly closed the book, extinguished the lamp. The remaining silence was good silence, dense, warm, and safe from the outside world. The back door had new hinges. Each time it opened, it no longer creaked but slid with a gentle sigh.